Hi Linda, I have brought myself a bit of a banquet along for our conversation. I hope you don't mind. I'm not going to eat it during the talking though, because I was brought up not to speak with my mouth full.
Okay.
I like the idea of heaven being like a big party. I think it comes up in a few places and stories in the Bible. But what do you think of our reading today? Matthew's version of the parable of the wedding banquet.
Well, I can't imagine anything like that happened when Prince Harry married Meghan Markle. Although there were plenty of comments about the fascinators that Princesses Eugenie and Beatrice wore to William and Kate's wedding. Seriously though, it's not the usual type of parable we expect from Jesus. People killing the messengers and then the king killing those people in revenge. What's that all about?
You know, you're right. I can't imagine many people turning down an invitation to a British royal wedding, although there was a bit of a to-do over who came or didn't come to Harry and Meghan's wedding, but let's not go there. It certainly comes across as a much more violent parable than I remember the story of the wedding banquet being. I think that we must usually use Luke's version, which has no killing and no weeping and gnashing of teeth. I suppose that the reaction shows how much it mattered. I mean, why would you kill the people who had brought you an invitation to a wedding banquet? I wonder if they were trying to send a clear message to the king that they wanted nothing to do with him. But then imagine what it must have felt like for the king, who would surely have expected the important people of his kingdom to come to his banquet, and then he finds that they all say no. There is something clearly wrong with the relationship between the king and his subjects in this story. If this is the way that Jesus told the story, I reckon he was trying to emphasize how important the response to the invitation is. It has life-changing consequences. But what do you think about the man who made it to the banquet but then got thrown out for wearing the wrong clothes? That also seems a bit harsh.
Yes, I agree that Jesus is trying to emphasize how important the invitation is. But as for the man in the wrong clothes, we need to think about the customs the people of the time would have been familiar with. So it was customary for wedding guests to be given clothes to wear to the banquet, and it was unthinkable to refuse to wear them. The host would have been insulted when he saw the man sitting in his own dirty clothes and feel that this man didn't really want to take part in the celebrations. Thinking about where the eventual guests came from, this man must have stood out like a sore thumb. It's not such a surprise now to read that he threw the man out. Now, what is Jesus really meaning? You mentioned at the beginning that you liked the idea of heaven being like a great big party celebration. And to be at that party is so immensely important to God that he repeatedly sends us invitations again and again. But once we accept the invitation, we must also choose to put on the clothes of righteousness that Jesus has provided for each and every one of us. In other words, it's no good accepting God's invitation and not wanting to change how we live our lives. Does this make any sense, Marion?
Yeah, it does. So the guest wearing the wrong clothes is there, but he has not allowed himself to be transformed. So it's a bit like being a spectator rather than someone who's fully committed. And it doesn't work for believers to just be spectators. You mentioned the customs of the time. I wonder whether we should also think about what the attitudes of the time might have been. I mean, we've picked out, I think, the bits of the parable which we find odd or difficult, but maybe the people who first heard Jesus tell this story had other issues with it. We are used to the idea of the poor and the lame being welcomed, but I doubt people of Jesus' time would have been too pleased about that. He's talking about inviting what they considered to be the dregs of society. I think I might have got mixed up with Luke's gospel again there. And if we look at the story in the setting of when it was told, we can see that it is part of a series of parables which Jesus gave in response to the challenge from the chief priests and elders about where his authority came from. I think that there is a not very subtle message in this story to the leaders of the people, because if the king represents God, then surely the people who received and rejected the original invitations were the Jewish leaders, and they have turned their backs on what God is doing. Or am I being too hard on them?
No, I don't think you're being too hard on the Jewish leaders, who I agree were the people who received and rejected the original invitation. We also know that they are plotting how to get rid of Jesus, a person who often depicted the role of a servant. You may be misquoting the parable from Matthew, but the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good. That's not really the dregs of society, is it? Just not the people you would expect to be mixing with royalty. I might be putting you on the spot now, but here goes. I think we all understand that God's welcome and invitation is for everyone. But how good are we at welcoming anyone and everyone? Are we truly inclusive?
If we're thinking in church terms, I'm tempted to say that it depends on the chapel. I know some places which are really welcoming, and others that can seem less so. I know some people who have happened to talk with the right other person when they first come along and fitted in straight away, and others who tell me, after they've been involved for 20 years or more, that they still don't feel that they know anyone, or that anyone is interested in them or takes the time to talk to them. I think it depends not only on those welcoming, but on the ones who are being welcomed. Both need to approach this with open hearts and minds, ready to get to know and engage with each other. And I know chapels where people do go out of their way to think about the needs of those who come along, and who genuinely seek not to discriminate on the basis of gender, skin colour, sexual orientation, mental health issues, physical differences, or anything else. But we do not always realise when we're discriminating, and I think it would be good for us to take some time as congregations to explore some of the resources around equality, diversity and inclusion which are available. But all of that is based on the idea that we are amongst the guests at the banquet, and that is about who we will take the time to talk with and get to know as we are mingling, waiting to be seated, or as we ask our fellow guests to pass the salt. I wonder whether, instead of seeing ourselves in this parable as the guests, although that is valid because we are all welcomed by God, but whether we could actually picture ourselves as the servants, sent out into the streets to gather people, both good and bad. If that were the case, then it asks two questions of us, I think. Firstly, it asks, do we accept that it is up to God to judge who is welcome, and that our role is just to invite everyone and anyone, whether or not we or society would class them as bad or good? And secondly, I think it asks, are we still too busy hobnobbing with our fellow guests as invitees when we could be out there on the streets trying to connect with and share the invitation with whoever has not yet received the invite? That is how we might be truly inclusive, and that is a real challenge. So I'm going to throw it back to you. That's a really big question. In the midst of a pandemic, when we are restricted in how we can meet together anyway, can we refocus and look out more than we look in? Perhaps we should be literally going out into the streets or wherever else it is and meeting with people in a socially distanced way, of course, taking the time to get to know them. Here's the real challenge. What would that approach look like as part of your life, Linda?
Well, we keep serving these curveballs at each other, don't we, Marion? Well, before COVID-19, I had been leading a small team and taking Open the Book out into a couple of our primary schools. Something I'm looking forward to doing again, and even expanding on it. Maybe I can get more teams. This was inviting children that are not coming into church to know something of the Bible through our dramatized stories. But at the moment, I'm doing my best to keep in touch with the young people and children that are already known to us. As you say, we can't meet in our chapels, so I'm delivering messy church packs out monthly. I'm also beginning to introduce myself to the baptism families, hoping that they will welcome future contact. In the summer, some of us in the circuit joined with a district virtual holiday club at home. And we thought we could branch out and do this ourselves. And this is happening for one day in October half term. And I'm really excited to see how well this goes.
That sounds great. And you know what? It also sounds manageable. The idea like Open the Book going into a school. And it's little steps, isn't it? I wonder if sometimes we scare ourselves with this big idea of going out to talk to people, when actually it's more about taking those little steps outside our comfort zone, thinking beyond the people who are already part of our congregations, looking outwards, talking to people we do not know as well, and as a church being visibly active in our communities, whether that's by organising a litter pick in the local park, coordinating the local act of remembrance, or yarn bombing our villages with knitted angels, or something else. You know, Linda, I've really enjoyed this conversation and digging into this Bible passage together and seeing how it applies perhaps in our day and time, although I think I still prefer Luke's version. I think we've got further together than we might have done on our own. Listening and talking about stuff really does help our understanding, doesn't it? And while you are excited about the circuit's half-term online holiday club, which does sound great, I am excited about all the people who will be getting involved, sharing in conversation together as part of the Rule of Six groups, which the circuit is encouraging. Just think of all the new connections and understanding and ideas which may come out of that.
Amen to that.